The champagne glass slipped from my hand, shattering across the marble floor of the Riverside Country Club ballroom. Everyone turned to stare, but I barely noticed. My stepfather's grip on my upper arm was so tight I could feel bruises forming beneath the sleeve of my navy dress. His smile never wavered as he steered me toward the garden exit, his fingers digging deeper with every step. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. To the 150 guests celebrating my sister Olivia's engagement to Daniel Carter, we probably looked like a father leading his daughter outside for a private conversation. They couldn't see the fury in Robert Mitchell's eyes, or hear the low hiss of his voice against my ear as the ballroom doors closed behind us. I'm Maya Johnson, and that September evening was supposed to be about my younger sister's happiness. Instead, it became the night everything I'd buried for 15 years finally clawed its way to the surface. The mistake I made wasn't dropping a glass or wearing the wrong dress or arriving 10 minutes late. My crime was simpler and somehow worse. I had smiled at the groom when he made a toast about finding true love in unexpected places. Just smiled. A genuine, warm smile because his words were kind and his love for my sister seemed real. But in Robert's world, I wasn't allowed genuine moments. I was the perpetual disappointment, the reminder of my mother's first marriage, the daughter who never quite learned to play the game correctly. The September air felt cold against my skin as Robert shoved me onto the stone patio overlooking the river. String lights twinkled overhead, romantic and peaceful, a stark contrast to the violence about to unfold. "You think you're clever," he said, his voice still low enough that the valet's parking cars 50 feet away wouldn't hear. Smiling at him like that. Making eyes at your sister's fiancé on her special night. I wasn't making eyes at anyone. My voice came out smaller than I wanted. I was just being polite during his toast. His hand cracked across my face so fast I didn't see it coming. The impact sent me stumbling backward, my hip connecting hard with the stone balustrade. Stars exploded across my vision, and I tasted copper on my tongue. "Don't you dare talk back to me." Robert straightened his tie, checking over his shoulder to make sure we were still alone. 15 years I've provided for you. Paid for your education, put a roof over your head, and you repay me with disrespect and embarrassment. His version of history always amazed me. The education he paid for was community college after he refused to co-sign loans for university. The roof over my head lasted until I turned 18, when he informed me that adults pay rent or find their own place. I'd moved into a studio apartment in East Austin that same week, working 2 jobs to cover tuition and living expenses while Olivia lived at home rent-free, her private university education fully funded. I didn't mean any disrespect. I kept my hand pressed to my cheek, feeling the heat radiating from where he'd struck me. It was just a smile. Just a smile, he repeated mockingly. You don't get it, do you? Everything you do reflects on this family. Every awkward expression, every inappropriate gesture, every reminder that you're not really one of us. The words landed like physical blows. Not really one of us. He'd been saying versions of this my entire adolescence, sometimes subtle, sometimes blatant. My mother had married Robert Mitchell when I was 13, 3 years after my father died in a car accident. Robert brought wealth and status and a gleaming new life for my mother and sister. He brought rules and criticism and impossible standards for me. You're going back in there, and you're going to apologize to your sister for causing a scene. Robert moved closer, backing me against the cold stone. You're going to tell her you had too much champagne and got clumsy. And for the rest of this evening, you will sit quietly, smile politely when appropriate, and stay far away from Daniel. Do you understand me? Before I could answer, the garden door opened. Daniel Carter stood silhouetted in the light from the ballroom, his tall frame filling the doorway. He'd loosened his tie, and his expression was concerned rather than angry. Everything okay out here? He asked, his gaze moving between Robert's rigid posture and my hand still pressed to my reddening cheek. I heard glass break. Robert's transformation was instantaneous. His shoulders relaxed, his face softened into a warm smile, and he stepped back from me casually. Just a little accident, he said easily. Maya's always been clumsy. Gets nervous at big events. I wanted to explain, to tell this man who was about to marry into our family what really happened. But years of conditioning kept my mouth shut. Who would believe me anyway? Robert Mitchell was a respected commercial real estate developer, a pillar of the Austin business community, a generous donor to local charities. I was the awkward daughter with no college degree and a job teaching art at an underfunded community center. Daniel's eyes lingered on my face, and I saw something flicker in his expression. Recognition maybe, or suspicion. "Your cheek is pretty red," he said to me directly. "Are you sure you're all right?" The attention was unexpected. Most people in my family's orbit never looked at me long enough to notice details. "I'm fine," I managed. "Just embarrassed about the glass." "I'll pay for it." "Don't be ridiculous," Robert interjected smoothly. "These things happen. Why don't you head inside, Maya? Your mother was looking for you earlier." It was a dismissal, polite but firm. I moved toward the door, but Daniel didn't step aside immediately. "Maya, right," he said, offering his hand. "We haven't officially met." "I'm Daniel. Olivia's told me a lot about you." I doubted that was true, or if it was, I doubted Olivia had said anything kind. My sister and I had once been close, before Robert entered our lives and created a hierarchy that placed her firmly at the top. I shook his hand briefly. "Congratulations on your engagement. She's lucky to have found you." He held my gaze a moment longer than necessary. "I'm the lucky one," he said. "But thank you. I hope we'll get to know each other better. Family means everything to me." The statement felt weighted with meaning I couldn't quite grasp. I nodded and slipped past him into the warmth of the ballroom. The party continued around me, guests laughing and dancing, champagne flowing freely. I found the restroom and locked myself in a stall, my hands shaking as adrenaline drained from my system. The face in the mirror when I finally emerged showed exactly what I expected. A handprint was forming across my left cheek, angry red marks that my foundation couldn't hide. My lip was slightly swollen where I'd bitten it during the impact. I looked like what I was, someone who'd just been hit. I wet paper towels with cold water and pressed them to my face, watching the redness slowly fade from livid to merely noticeable. This wasn't the first time Robert had struck me. The physical violence had started small when I was 14, a shove here, a grabbed wrist there. By 16 it had escalated to slaps and punches, always in private, always followed by threats about what would happen if I told. My mother knew. I'd tried telling her once, when I was 15. She'd looked at me with tired eyes and said I must have misunderstood, that Robert would never do such a thing, that maybe I needed to think about why I was always causing problems. So I'd learned to be smaller, quieter, less visible. I'd moved out the day I turned 18. I'd built a life separate from the Mitchells' gleaming world of country clubs and charity galas. I saw my mother occasionally for lunch, my sister even less frequently. I attended mandatory family events with my shoulders hunched and my opinion swallowed. And I told myself it was fine, that I'd escaped, that the occasional bruise was the price of maintaining some connection to the family I'd once had. Standing in that country club bathroom, staring at my reflection, something shifted inside me. Maybe it was the humiliation of being struck at my sister's engagement party. Maybe it was the way Daniel had looked at me with actual concern. Maybe it was just 15 years of swallowed rage finally reaching critical mass. Whatever the reason, I felt a crack forming in the careful walls I'd built around my anger. I pulled out my phone and did something I hadn't done in 10 years. I called my Aunt Claire. Claire Reynolds was my father's older sister, the only connection I had left to the family I'd come from before Robert Mitchell rewrote our history. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm and familiar. "Maya, sweetheart. This is a surprise. Are you okay?" The question almost broke me. When was the last time someone in my family had asked if I was okay and actually waited for an honest answer? "I'm at Olivia's engagement party," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Robert hit me. "And I think I'm done pretending it's fine." The silence on the other end lasted 3 heartbeats. Then Claire's voice came back, harder than I'd ever heard it. Where are you exactly? I'll be there in 20 minutes. Stay somewhere public. Don't go anywhere alone with him again. Do you understand me? I understand. Can you really come? Maya, Claire said fiercely. I've been waiting for this phone call for 15 years. Your father would have never forgiven me if I didn't protect his daughter when she finally asked for help. I should have done more sooner, but you kept pushing me away. I'm not missing this chance. We hung up, and I stared at my phone, processing what had just happened. For 15 years I'd convinced myself I was handling things, that I was strong enough to endure Robert's abuse without help. Now, with one phone call, I'd set something in motion that I couldn't take back. The thought terrified and exhilarated me in equal measure. I fixed my makeup as best I could, squared my shoulders, and returned to the party. The ballroom felt different now, like I was seeing it through new eyes. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Robert held court near the bar, telling stories that made his circle of listeners laugh. My mother stood beside him, elegant in emerald silk, playing the perfect wife. Olivia danced with Daniel, her white cocktail dress spinning as he twirled her, both of them glowing with happiness. And I stood at the edge of it all, invisible as always. Except this time, I wasn't planning to stay invisible. This time, I had called for backup. This time, things were going to be different. Aunt Claire arrived exactly 20 minutes later, striding through the country club entrance like she owned the place. At 63, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had nothing left to prove. Her silver hair was cut short and sharp, and she wore dark jeans with a blazer that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She spotted me immediately where I'd positioned myself near the dessert table, visible to the crowd but not isolated. Her eyes went straight to my cheek, and I watched her jaw tighten. She crossed the ballroom without acknowledging anyone else, pulling me into a hug that smelled like lavender and old books. Let me see, she said quietly, tilting my face toward the light. The mark had faded somewhat, but the outline of fingers was still visible if you knew what to look for. She knew what to look for. Her expression went cold in a way that reminded me of my father, the same steel beneath gentleness that I barely remembered from childhood. We're leaving, she announced. Get your things. I can't just leave Olivia's party. The protest was automatic, years of conditioning making me prioritize keeping peace over protecting myself. Yes, you absolutely can. Claire's voice was firm but not loud. You're an adult woman who was just assaulted. You don't owe anyone here your continued presence, least of all him. She didn't point, didn't look in Robert's direction, but we both knew who she meant. Besides, we have things to discuss. Things I should have told you years ago. The cryptic statement caught my attention more than anything else could have. What things? Not here. Claire took my arm gently, the opposite of how Robert had grabbed me earlier. Trust me, Maya. Please. Something in her tone made me nod. I didn't have a coat to collect, just the small clutch I'd been carrying. As we moved toward the exit, I caught Daniel's eye across the dance floor. He was still dancing with Olivia, but he was watching me leave with an expression I couldn't quite read. Curiosity maybe, or concern. Our eyes met for just a moment before Olivia said something that pulled his attention back to her. The night air felt cleaner away from the country club's oppressive elegance. Claire had parked her vintage Mercedes near the entrance, and I sank into the leather passenger seat with relief. She didn't start the engine immediately. Instead, she turned to face me fully. Tell me everything that happened tonight. So I did. I described the toast, the smile, Robert's fury at something so innocuous. I described being dragged outside, the accusations, the slap. Claire listened without interrupting, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles went white. When I finished, she sat in silence for a long moment. Then she said something that changed everything. Your father saw through Robert Mitchell from the very first time your mother brought him around. This was before Dad died, before the engagement even. I nodded slowly, trying to follow. Robert started coming around when I was about 12, maybe a year after Dad's accident. They weren't dating yet, just friends from some grief support group Mom had joined. Your father was already sick by then, Claire continued. The cancer had spread, and he knew he didn't have much time. He made me promise something before he died. Made me swear I'd look after you specifically. Why specifically me? Because he could see what Robert was. Claire finally started the car, pulling out of the parking lot and heading toward the highway. Your dad was a family therapist, Maya. He spent his entire career helping people, understanding human behavior, recognizing patterns of abuse and manipulation. He watched Robert for 6 months and saw exactly what kind of man he was. Controlling, narcissistic, someone who needed to dominate every space he entered. Your father tried to tell your mother, but she was so lonely, so scared of being a widow with 2 daughters. She didn't want to hear it. I stared out the window, watching Austin's lights blur past. I'd never known any of this. My memories of the year before Dad died were fragmented, clouded by grief and the confusion of early adolescence. Why didn't you tell me this before? Claire's voice was heavy with regret. Because you were a child when your father died. Then a teenager trying to survive in that house. Every time I tried to talk to you about Robert, you shut down. You said you were fine, that you could handle it, that you didn't want me making trouble. By the time you were old enough to hear the truth, you'd built walls so high I couldn't climb them. She wasn't wrong. I'd spent years perfecting the art of saying I'm fine while everything inside me screamed otherwise. I'd pushed Claire away repeatedly, afraid that her interference would make things worse, that Robert's anger would escalate if he thought I was talking to people outside his control. Where are we going? I asked as she took the exit toward South Austin. My house. There's something you need to see. Something your father left for you. Claire's home was exactly as I remembered from occasional childhood visits, warm and cluttered with books and art and the accumulated treasures of a life well lived. She'd been a professor of psychology at UT Austin before retiring, and her walls reflected decades of travel and teaching. She led me to her study, a cozy room lined floor to ceiling with bookshelves. From a locked drawer in her desk, she pulled out a large manila envelope, worn at the edges from years of storage. Your father gave this to me 2 weeks before he died, Claire said, handling the envelope like it was precious. He made me promise not to give it to you until you were ready. I've been waiting 15 years for you to be ready, Maya. Tonight, when you called me, I knew the time had finally come. My hands shook as I took the envelope. It was heavy, packed with papers. My father's handwriting was on the outside, just my name in his distinctive script. I hadn't seen his handwriting in so many years that the sight of it made my throat tight. Open it, Claire encouraged gently. She poured 2 glasses of wine and handed me one before settling into the chair opposite her desk. I'll be right here. The envelope seal had been broken long ago, probably when my father first gave it to Claire, but the contents were pristine. I pulled out the first item, a letter addressed to me in my father's hand. My dear Maya, it began, and I had to pause, taking a deep breath before continuing. If you're reading this, I'm gone, and I hope you've grown into the strong, creative, compassionate woman I always knew you'd become. I'm writing this because I'm worried about your future in ways that break my heart. The letter continued for 3 pages, my father's voice clear and present despite the years. He wrote about his concerns regarding Robert Mitchell, about the patterns of behavior he'd observed, about the subtle ways Robert had already begun undermining my confidence even as a 12-year-old girl. He wrote about making Claire promise to watch over me, to step in if things got bad. He wrote about loving me and your mother and Olivia, but knowing that his death would leave a vacuum that Robert would fill in dangerous ways. I'm not including these observations to frighten you, the letter continued near the end, but to validate what you may have experienced. If Robert has hurt you, if he's made you feel small or worthless or invisible, I want you to know that none of it is true. You are remarkable, Maya. You have your grandmother's artistic gift, your mother's intelligence, and I hope at least a little of my ability to see people clearly. Don't let anyone dim your light, especially not someone who needs to diminish others to feel powerful himself. The final paragraph made tears stream down my face. I've left documentation with Claire, everything I observed and recorded during those last months. If you ever need it, if you ever need proof that you're not crazy or oversensitive or imagining things, it's there. I wish I could be there to protect you myself, but since I can't, I'm giving you the tools to protect yourself. Use them when you're ready. I love you forever, Dad. Beneath the letter were notebooks, dozens of pages in my father's careful handwriting. He documented everything, dated entries describing Robert's interactions with our family. The observations were clinical, professional, the insights of a trained therapist watching manipulation unfold in real time. He noted how Robert praised Olivia excessively while criticizing me for the same behaviors. He documented Robert's subtle efforts to isolate my mother from her friends. He recorded conversations where Robert undermined my interests and achievements, always couched in language that sounded supportive on the surface. Claire watched me read, sipping her wine in silence. When I finally looked up, my face wet with tears, she leaned forward. Your father saw it all, Maya. Every bit of what you've lived through, he predicted it. He knew exactly what Robert was and what he'd do once there was no one to check his behavior. Why, I whispered. Why does he hate me so much? What did I ever do to him? You existed, Claire said simply. You were living proof that your mother had a whole life before him, that she loved someone else, that he wasn't the beginning of her story. Narcissists like Robert can't tolerate that. They need to be the center, the origin point, the most important person in every room. You were a daily reminder that he wasn't. And worse, you look exactly like your father. Every time Robert looks at you, he sees the man your mother truly loved. The explanation settled into place with horrible clarity. I'd spent years trying to figure out what I'd done wrong, what character flaw made me so unlovable to my stepfather. The truth was simpler and sadder. I hadn't done anything wrong. My existence itself was the problem, and nothing I could have done differently would have changed that. There's more, Claire said, pulling out another folder. Your father also documented his assets and his will. Did you know he had a life insurance policy? I shook my head. After Dad died, Mom had said there was barely enough to cover the funeral and some outstanding medical bills. We'd lived modestly after that, or at least I thought we had, until Robert entered the picture with his money and his big house. According to these documents, Claire said, your father had a $200,000 life insurance policy. Your mother was the beneficiary, with the instruction that half should be set aside in trust for you and Olivia's education. She showed me the policy paperwork, clear and official. I never saw any of that money. My voice came out flat. Robert refused to help with my college costs. He said I needed to learn responsibility, that handouts created entitled children. Olivia's entire university education was paid for. Exactly, Claire said. I've always suspected your mother gave Robert access to that insurance money, and he used it for Olivia while telling you there was nothing available. I can't prove it without seeing your mother's bank records from that time, but the math certainly suggests it. The betrayals were stacking up, each one a fresh wound. My father had tried to protect me even from beyond the grave, and somehow his provisions had been twisted or hidden or stolen. I sat there in Claire's study, surrounded by my father's words and warnings, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. For 15 years I'd been surviving. Maybe it was time to start fighting back. What do I do with all this? I asked Claire, gesturing at the papers spread across her desk. We document what's happening now, she said firmly. We add your testimony to your father's observations. We build a case that shows a pattern of abuse spanning 15 years. And then, when you're ready, we decide what to do with it. I'm not saying you have to go to the police or sue anyone or blow up your family. But I am saying you deserve to have the full truth, and you deserve to have options. You're not powerless, Maya. You never were. You've just been convinced that you are. I stayed at Claire's house that night, sleeping in her guest room surrounded by my father's love and documentation. My phone buzzed repeatedly with texts from my mother asking where I'd gone, why I'd left the party early, whether I was feeling all right. Nothing from Robert, which was typical. He delivered his message, and as far as he was concerned, the matter was closed. Nothing from Olivia either, too wrapped up in her engagement celebration to notice my absence. But there was one unexpected message, sent around midnight. It was from Daniel Carter. "Hey Maya, this is Daniel. I got your number from Olivia's phone, hope that's okay. Just wanted to make sure you're alright. You left pretty quickly, and I couldn't help noticing your cheek looked red earlier. If you ever need to talk, I'm a good listener. No pressure, just wanted you to know." The message sat there glowing on my screen, unexpected kindness from an unlikely source. I didn't respond that night, wasn't sure what I could say. But I saved the message, adding it to the growing collection of evidence that maybe, just maybe, not everyone in my family's orbit was blind to what was happening. Tomorrow was Olivia's engagement brunch, another mandatory family event. The old Maya would have shown up with makeup covering the bruise, apologizing for leaving early, playing the role of difficult daughter who'd caused a scene. But lying in Claire's guest room, surrounded by my father's fierce protection and clear-eyed truth, I started to wonder what the new Maya might do instead. The engagement brunch was being held at my mother's house, the sprawling Westlake Hills property that Robert had purchased shortly after their marriage. I'd avoided going there for nearly 2 years, finding excuses to meet my mother at restaurants or coffee shops instead. The house itself was beautiful in that sterile, professionally decorated way that magazine spreads loved. Nothing about it felt like home, at least not to me. Every surface gleamed, every pillow sat at the perfect angle, every family photo had been carefully curated to present the image Robert wanted the world to see. Claire drove me there at 11, an hour after the brunch had officially started. We'd spent the morning strategizing, going over my father's documentation, discussing what I wanted to accomplish. Claire had made one thing absolutely clear. I didn't have to confront anyone today. I didn't have to do anything except exist and observe. But if I wanted to start setting boundaries, she'd be right there beside me. The late arrival was my first small rebellion, a statement that I wouldn't be rushing to accommodate Robert's schedule anymore. My mother opened the door, her smile bright and artificial. "Maya, sweetheart, we were getting worried." She pulled me into a hug that smelled like her expensive perfume, the scent I associated with 1,000 childhood memories that felt increasingly complicated. "Claire, what a surprise. We weren't expecting you." I invited her, I said clearly. I needed support after last night. Something flickered across my mother's face, a brief crack in her composed expression before it smoothed over again. "Last night was unfortunate. Your stepfather mentioned you had a bit too much champagne and took a fall." I wanted to hear her say it, wanted to hear how she'd explain away the handprint on my daughter's face. "I didn't fall," I said evenly. "Robert hit me because I smiled at Daniel during his toast." Mom's eyes darted toward the living room where voices and laughter indicated the brunch was in full swing. Her hand tightened on the door frame. "Maya, please. Not here. Not today. This is Olivia's celebration." "When then?" I asked. "When is it appropriate to talk about the fact that your husband has been physically abusing me for 15 years? Mom went pale, her eyes filling with tears that I knew from experience meant nothing. She cried easily, dramatically, in ways that always made me feel guilty for upsetting her. But standing there with Claire's solid presence behind me, I felt something different. Anger, maybe. Or just exhaustion with the whole performance. "Your father never hit me in all the years we were married," I continued, my voice low but steady. "He treated me with kindness and respect. He saw through Robert from the beginning, and he tried to warn you. You chose not to listen. Now I'm choosing not to stay silent anymore." "Linda," Claire said, her voice carrying the authority of an older sister addressing a younger one, "we need to talk. All of us. Including Robert. You can either invite us in for a civilized conversation, or Maya and I can leave and handle this through other channels. The choice is yours." Mom's composure crumbled. She stepped back, gesturing us inside with a shaking hand. The living room was filled with people, mostly Olivia's friends and some of Robert's business associates with their wives. Olivia herself sat on the white sofa, radiant in a pale pink dress, opening gifts with Daniel beside her. She looked up when we entered, her smile faltering when she saw my face. "Maya, you're here." Her voice held more surprise than warmth. "Mom said you weren't feeling well." "I'm fine," I said. "Just had some things to take care of this morning." I felt the weight of everyone's attention, saw Robert standing near the windows, his expression carefully neutral. He'd seen me, registered Claire's presence, and was already calculating his response. Daniel stood, offering his hand to Claire. "I don't think we've met." "I'm Daniel Carter." "Claire Reynolds," she said, shaking his hand firmly. "Maya's aunt. Her father's sister. I wanted to meet the man who's joining our family." The emphasis on our family wasn't subtle. Daniel's eyes moved between me and Claire, and I saw intelligence working behind his polite smile. He was putting pieces together, though I wasn't sure yet what picture he was forming. "It's wonderful that Maya has family here," he said. "Family support is so important, especially during big life transitions." He was looking at me when he said it, and I realized he'd noticed more last night than I'd given him credit for. Robert moved into the center of the room, taking control the way he always did. "Claire, what a pleasant surprise. We weren't expecting you, but you're always welcome." His voice was warm, hospitable, the perfect host. "How have you been?" "I've been better," Claire said coolly. "I spent last night looking at my brother's old journals, remembering all his concerns about this family. Funny how accurate his observations turned out to be." The room went silent. Even the friends who didn't understand the subtext could feel the tension crackling through the air. Robert's smile tightened. "I'm not sure what you're implying, but this hardly seems like the time or place for dredging up ancient history." "It's not ancient history when it's still happening," Claire countered. "When did you hit Maya last night, Robert? Before or after you accused her of making advances toward her sister's fiancé?" The gasps were audible. Olivia stood up, her face flushing. "What are you talking about?" "Maya, what is she talking about?" I met my sister's eyes, saw genuine confusion there mixed with something that might have been fear. She didn't want to know the truth, I realized. Knowing would complicate her perfect narrative, would force her to choose sides in a conflict she'd spent years pretending didn't exist. "Robert hit me on the patio last night," I said clearly. "He dragged me outside because I smiled at Daniel during his toast. He accused me of inappropriate behavior, then he slapped me hard enough to leave marks." I turned my face, showing the bruise that makeup couldn't fully hide in the bright morning light. "This isn't the first time. It's been happening since I was 14 years old." "That's a lie," Robert said, his voice sharp. "I've never laid a hand on you. You're upset because we've had disagreements about your behavior over the years, about your inability to appreciate what this family has provided for you. But to make accusations of violence is absurd and frankly slanderous." "Is it?" Claire pulled out her phone, tapping the screen a few times. "Because Maya called me immediately after you hit her. The timestamp shows 11:47 last night. She described what happened in detail, including the location, your exact words, and the physical assault. I have the recording if anyone would like to hear it." I hadn't known Claire recorded our conversation, but I was grateful for her foresight. Robert's expression hardened. "A phone call proves nothing. She could have made up any story after having too much to drink. She was clearly intoxicated, dropped a glass, got emotional. I tried to have a fatherly conversation with her about appropriate behavior, and now she's twisting it into something ugly." The gaslighting was textbook perfect. Robert's tone was reasonable, concerned, tinged with the disappointment of a parent dealing with a troubled child. I watched several of his business associates nodding sympathetically, already accepting his version. This was why victims stayed silent, I realized. Because even with evidence, even with witnesses to the aftermath, men like Robert were so skilled at reframing reality that truth became slippery and subjective. Daniel spoke up, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "I was there." He looked directly at Robert, his expression unreadable. "I came outside because I heard what sounded like an argument. When I opened the door, Robert was standing very close to Maya, backing her against the stone railing. She had her hand pressed to her face, and I could see redness that looked like a handprint even from the doorway. Robert claimed she'd had too much to drink and was clumsy, but Maya looked scared, not drunk. The room erupted. Olivia stared at Daniel like he'd betrayed her. Robert's face went red with rage barely contained beneath his veneer of civility. My mother started crying in earnest, pressing her hands to her mouth. And I stood there feeling like the ground was shifting beneath my feet, because Daniel Carter, this man I barely knew, had just validated my truth in front of everyone who mattered. "You don't know what you saw," Robert said tightly. "You walked in on the tail end of a private family discussion." "No," Daniel said firmly. "I know exactly what I saw. I've seen it before, actually. My mother worked for a domestic violence shelter for 20 years. I grew up learning to recognize the signs of abuse, the dynamics, the way abusers operate. Last night triggered every alarm bell I'd been trained to notice." He turned to Olivia, his expression gentle but resolute. "I'm sorry. I know this isn't what you want to hear at your celebration. But I can't marry into a family and pretend I don't see what's happening. If we're going to build a life together, it has to be based on truth and safety for everyone involved." Olivia's eyes filled with tears. "You're ruining my engagement brunch with these horrible accusations." Maya has always been dramatic, always trying to get attention. This is exactly the kind of scene she creates. She's jealous because I'm happy. The word stung more than I expected. My little sister, who I'd protected from neighborhood bullies, who I'd helped with homework and relationship drama, who I'd loved despite the growing distance between us, truly believed I was capable of fabricating abuse for attention. Claire stepped forward, placing herself between me and the crowd. "Olivia," she said, her voice sad but firm, "I have 15 years of documentation. Your father, Maya's father, predicted all of this before he died. He saw Robert's patterns, documented his concerns, and left evidence for precisely this moment. You can call your sister dramatic, or you can look at the evidence and accept that you've been living in a carefully constructed illusion." "Show me," Daniel said suddenly. "Show me this documentation. If what you're saying is true, I want to see it." Robert moved fast, crossing the room toward Claire with his hand outstretched. "You have no right to share private family matters with strangers." "Daniel isn't a stranger," Claire said, stepping back and keeping her phone out of Robert's reach. "He's about to become family. And family should know what they're marrying into. Besides, Maya's father was my brother. His observations are my family history to share." "I'll sue you for defamation," Robert threatened. "I'll destroy you both for spreading these lies." "On what grounds?" Claire asked calmly. "Truth is an absolute defense against defamation, Robert. Everything I'm sharing is documented, dated, and corroborated. You're welcome to try, but I don't think you want discovery. I don't think you want lawyers digging into your finances, your behavior, your treatment of a child you had power over. Do you?" The threat hung in the air, electric with possibility. I saw Robert calculating, weighing his options, trying to figure out how to regain control of a situation that was spiraling away from him. "Mom," I said quietly, forcing myself to look at her tear-stained face. "You knew. Maybe not everything, but you knew enough. You saw the bruises when I was younger. You heard the way he talked to me. You chose to look away because it was easier than admitting you'd married someone dangerous." Linda looked like she might shatter. "I didn't know," she whispered. I thought you were just difficult. That you and Robert clashed because you reminded him you weren't his biological daughter. I thought if I could just get you both to try harder, to understand each other." She trailed off, the weakness of her excuse evident even to herself. Olivia stood abruptly. "I can't do this. This is supposed to be my day, my celebration. Maya, you always do this. You always make everything about you and your problems. Why can't you just be happy for me for once?" "Because being happy for you required me to stay silent while I got hurt," I said, my voice breaking. "Because every time I came to a family event, I risked being hit or humiliated or told I wasn't really part of this family. I've been erasing myself for years so you could have your perfect life, Olivia. I'm done doing that. Daniel touched Olivia's arm gently. We should talk. Privately. I think there are things we need to discuss before we move forward with wedding plans. She jerked away from him. If you believe her over me, if you believe these awful accusations about my father, then maybe we shouldn't get married at all. The ultimatum was clear. Choose my version of reality or lose me. I watched Daniel's face, saw the moment he made his decision. I believe Maya, he said quietly. And I believe that until your family deals with this honestly, I can't in good conscience become part of it. Olivia's engagement ring hit the hardwood floor with a sound like breaking glass. She'd pulled it off her finger and thrown it at Daniel's feet, her face contorted with rage and hurt. If you choose her lies over our future, then we have no future, she said, her voice shaking. Everyone in this room knows Maya has always been troubled, always needed attention, always resented me for being successful. This is just another manipulation. Daniel didn't pick up the ring. He looked at my sister with something like grief in his eyes. I spent 6 months getting to know your family before I proposed. I met Maya exactly twice in all that time. Both times, she was polite, distant, and left as quickly as possible. That's not attention-seeking behavior, Olivia. That's avoidance. That's someone trying to survive family gatherings without incident. He paused, glancing at me before continuing. Last night on the patio, Robert was standing over her in a threatening posture. She had a handprint on her face. Those are facts, not interpretations. Robert's business associate, a man I vaguely recognized from previous events, cleared his throat awkwardly. Perhaps we should give the family some privacy. This seems like a personal matter. Yes, please leave, Robert said quickly, seizing the opportunity. I apologize for this disruption. Family disagreements can get heated, but we'll sort this out privately. The guests began gathering their things, shooting curious glances at me and whispering to each other. I could already imagine how this would be spun in their social circles. Poor Robert Mitchell, dealing with an unstable stepdaughter who made wild accusations at his daughter's engagement celebration. Before everyone scattered, Claire raised her voice. Actually, I think witnesses might be valuable. She looked at the retreating guests. You all saw Maya's face when she arrived. You can see the bruising even under makeup. If any of you are called upon to provide testimony about what you observed here today, I hope you'll tell the truth. Several people paused, clearly uncomfortable but now implicated in whatever was unfolding. One woman, someone I recognized as belonging to my mother's book club, met my eyes with something that looked like sympathy before hurrying out. After the guests departed, the remaining group felt smaller and more volatile. Just family now, except for Daniel, who seemed uncertain whether he still belonged in that category. My mother had collapsed into an armchair, crying quietly. Robert stood by the window, his back rigid with fury. Olivia sat on the couch, staring at the engagement ring still lying on the floor. Claire and I remained standing, united in a way that felt both strange and powerful. This is what's going to happen, Claire announced into the tense silence. Maya is going to file a police report about last night's assault. She's also going to pursue a restraining order. Robert, you're going to stay away from her completely. No contact, no showing up at her workplace, no using Linda or Olivia as intermediaries. Robert spun around, his face purple. You can't be serious. File whatever reports you want. No one will believe her. It'll be dismissed as a family squabble. Maybe, Claire acknowledged. Or maybe the police will take it seriously, especially when they see the documentation spanning 15 years. Maybe they'll want to know why a grown man repeatedly assaulted a child in his care. Mandatory reporters might have questions about why incidents were never reported when Maya was a minor. School counselors, doctors who treated injuries. The web gets complicated when you start pulling threads, Robert. I never saw any doctors, I said quietly. He was always careful not to hurt me anywhere visible, and when he did, I was told to say I'd fallen or bumped into something. I learned to be clumsy in everyone's narrative. Claire's expression tightened with anger, but she kept her voice level. That kind of systematic abuse of a minor, combined with current assault, makes for a compelling case. Especially when the victim's deceased father documented his concerns about the abuser before his death. It establishes a pattern that predates any possible motive for false accusation. "Mom," Olivia said desperately, turning to our mother. "Tell them this is insane. Tell them Dad never hurt Maya." Linda Mitchell looked at her youngest daughter, then at me, then down at her own hands. Her voice when she spoke was barely audible. "I don't know anymore. I thought Robert was strict but fair. That Maya was rebellious and needed firm guidance. But there were incidents over the years that I explained away. Times when Maya flinched if Robert moved too quickly. Times when she wore long sleeves in summer. Times when she stopped coming home for holidays." "You knew," I said, the realization hitting me with fresh pain. "Maybe you didn't let yourself think about it directly, but somewhere inside, you knew. And you chose him anyway. Chose his money, his status, the life he provided. You chose all of that over protecting your own daughter." My mother's sobs grew louder, but I felt no satisfaction in her pain. Just a hollow ache where love used to be. "What about the insurance money?" Claire interjected, shifting gears. "The $200,000 from Maya's father's life insurance policy. Where did that money go, Linda?" My mother's head snapped up, eyes wide. "How do you know about that?" "Because my brother told me about it before he died," Claire said. "He showed me the policy. $50,000 was supposed to be set aside for final expenses. The remaining $150,000 was to be split between educational trusts for Maya and Olivia. Yet somehow, Maya was told there was no money for her college, while Olivia's entire university education was funded. Where did Maya's share go?" The silence that followed was damning. Robert's expression shifted from rage to something more calculating, like he was trying to figure out what exactly Claire knew versus what she was guessing. Olivia looked genuinely shocked, as if this piece of information had never been shared with her. "I used it for the family," Mom finally said, her voice defensive. "For this house, for maintaining the lifestyle we all enjoyed. Robert said it was better to invest in our future than to separate it into individual accounts." "So you gave my father's money to Robert," I said slowly. "Money specifically designated for me and Olivia, and you let him absorb it into joint accounts. Did you even set up trusts, or did you just hand it over?" "We needed it," Mom insisted. I was overwhelmed, didn't understand investments and trust funds. Robert handled everything. He said we could access it more easily for both girls' needs if it wasn't locked up in separate accounts. But Olivia got a fully funded education, and I got nothing, I pointed out. "How is that meeting both girls' needs equally?" "You could have tried harder in school, gotten scholarships," Olivia interjected, her voice sharp. "I worked for my grades. I earned my opportunities. Your grades were better because you weren't living in fear," I shot back. "You didn't spend your teenage years walking on eggshells, trying not to trigger Robert's temper. You were the golden child who could do no wrong. I was the scapegoat who could do nothing right. The difference in our lives wasn't about merit, Olivia. It was about Robert deciding you were worthy of investment and I wasn't." "This is absurd," Robert said, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. "You're twisting normal family dynamics into some conspiracy. Families make financial decisions together. I helped Linda manage her finances after her husband died. I ensured both girls had roofs over their heads, food on the table, opportunities for success. If Maya chose not to take advantage of what was offered, that's her failure, not mine. What was offered to me, I demanded. Community college while Olivia went to private university. An ultimatum to pay rent at 18 or move out. Years of being told I was ungrateful, difficult, not really part of the family. Being hit when I didn't perform the right emotions on command. That's what was offered to me, Robert. Forgive me for not being more grateful." Daniel had been quiet throughout this exchange, but now he spoke. Mr. Mitchell, I've been listening carefully. Your defense keeps shifting. First Maya was lying about everything. Then she was exaggerating normal discipline. Now it's that she didn't appreciate what she was given. That's textbook abuser logic. My mother spent decades working with victims and perpetrators. I recognize the patterns. You don't know anything about this family, Robert snarled. You've been around for 6 months, and you think you can judge complex relationships spanning 15 years. I know enough, Daniel said quietly. I know that last night I saw a young woman with a handprint on her face, being told by her abuser that she'd brought it on herself. I know that today I've heard multiple witnesses describe a pattern of differential treatment, financial manipulation, and physical violence. I know that Maya's aunt has documentation from a trained therapist expressing concerns about your behavior before he died. That's not complex family dynamics. That's abuse. Olivia stood abruptly. I can't believe you're doing this. You're destroying my family, destroying my engagement, destroying everything for someone you barely know. He barely knows me because I was never allowed to be part of family events properly, I said to my sister. Every holiday, every celebration, I walked in knowing I might say or do the wrong thing and face consequences later. You never noticed because you were never the target, Olivia. But that doesn't mean it wasn't happening. Olivia's face was flushed, tears streaming down her cheeks. If any of this was true, why didn't you say something years ago? Why wait until now, until my engagement, to bring it all up? You think I wanted this timing? I asked, incredulous. I've been silent for 15 years specifically to avoid ruining your happiness. I skipped your high school graduation party because I had a black eye and didn't want to cause drama. I left your college graduation dinner early because Robert told me if I stayed, he'd make sure I regretted it. I've been erasing myself from your milestones for years, and you never once asked why. The revelation seemed to genuinely shock Olivia. She looked at our mother. Is that true? Did Maya have a black eye at my graduation? Mom's silence was answer enough. Linda, Claire said, her voice heavy with disappointment, you've been complicit in this for too long. Whether through action or inaction, you've allowed a man to abuse your daughter. Maya's father trusted you to protect his children after he was gone. You failed that trust in the most fundamental way possible. I did my best, Mom whispered. I was alone, scared, trying to hold everything together. Robert provided stability. He provided control, Claire corrected. There's a difference. And now you have to decide what kind of person you want to be going forward. Are you going to keep protecting him, or are you finally going to protect your daughter? The question hung in the air, heavy with consequence. I watched my mother struggle with it, saw the war between self-preservation and maternal instinct playing out across her face. Part of me wanted her to choose me, to finally put my safety above her comfort. Another part of me had already accepted that she wouldn't, that she'd chosen Robert over me so many times that one more betrayal was inevitable. I'm calling my lawyer, Robert announced, pulling out his phone. This has gone far enough. Claire, Maya, you'll be hearing from my attorney about defamation, harassment, and whatever other charges he can come up with. Go ahead, Claire said calmly. I welcome the legal process. Discovery will be illuminating for everyone involved. Robert's hand hesitated over his phone, the calculation crossing his face again. He was realizing, perhaps for the first time, that threatening legal action might expose him to more scrutiny than he wanted. Daniel picked up the engagement ring from the floor, holding it carefully. He walked over to Olivia and held it out to her. I love you. But I can't marry into a family that's actively enabling abuse. If you want to work through this, if you want to face the truth about what's been happening and address it honestly, I'll be here. But I won't pretend everything is fine when it clearly isn't. I won't celebrate at a wedding while Maya lives in fear of the man giving you away. Olivia stared at the ring but didn't take it. You're choosing her over me. I'm choosing truth over comfortable lies, Daniel corrected gently. There's a difference. The engagement isn't necessarily over, Olivia. But it's on hold until your family deals with this. He set the ring on the coffee table and stepped back. The police report was filed that Monday morning. Detective Sarah Chen sat across from me in a small interview room, her expression neutral but attentive as I walked through 15 years of abuse. Claire had come with me, bringing my father's documentation, photographs of old bruises I'd kept hidden in a shoebox, and the recording from the engagement party. By the end of my statement, Detective Chen's neutrality had shifted into something harder. "This is substantial," she said, reviewing the materials. "The historical documentation from your father gives us context that's rare in these cases. Most abuse allegations are he said, she said. You have a therapist's professional observations predating the marriage, which establishes predictive validity." She looked up at me. "I'm going to be honest with you, Maya. Prosecution for a single slap at a party can be difficult. Defense attorneys paint it as a family argument that got heated. But this," she gestured at the stack of papers, "this shows pattern and practice. This changes everything." The restraining order was granted within 48 hours. Robert was served at his office, which gave me some satisfaction. His carefully constructed professional image was cracking, and everyone in his business circle would know something serious had happened. My mother called 17 times that day. I didn't answer. Olivia sent a single text message that said simply, "I hope you're happy now." I wasn't happy. I was exhausted and sad and angry and relieved all at once. But I was also, for the first time in 15 years, safe. Daniel called on Wednesday. I almost didn't answer, unsure what he could possibly want to say. "Maya, I wanted you to know that I've moved into a hotel for now. I told Olivia I need space to think, and I meant it." His voice was tired. I also wanted to apologize. I should have seen what was happening sooner. I should have asked more questions when you were so distant at family dinners, when you always left early. I made assumptions about you being shy or not liking me, when really you were just trying to survive. "You barely knew me," I said. "You're not responsible for figuring out my family's dysfunction." "Maybe not," he agreed. "But I am responsible for what I do now. I've been talking to my mother, getting her perspective on what she observed at the engagement party. She's willing to give a statement if it helps your case. She noticed things I missed, the way Robert positioned himself to block you from leaving, the way your mother looked away when he grabbed your arm." The investigation moved faster than I expected. Detective Chen was thorough, interviewing people who'd been at the engagement party, reviewing the country club security footage which showed Robert dragging me outside, talking to my old high school counselors who remembered a quiet girl who wore long sleeves and flinched easily. The district attorney's office decided to file charges, not just for the recent assault but for historical abuse of a minor. Apparently my father's documentation, combined with my testimony and corroborating witnesses, was enough to build a case. Robert hired an expensive defense team that immediately went on the offensive. Articles appeared in local business journals questioning the credibility of adult children who made allegations against stepparents, usually in the context of inheritance disputes. The implication was clear even though it was never stated outright. I was a bitter, troubled woman trying to extort money from a successful man who generously provided for me. The narrative was predictable and still managed to hurt. But then something unexpected happened. 2 other women came forward. Both had briefly dated Robert in the years between my father's death and his marriage to my mother. Both described controlling behavior that escalated into violence. Both had police reports from decades ago that had gone nowhere because back then, domestic violence wasn't taken as seriously. Detective Chen called me personally to share the news. "Your case opened a door for them to speak up. Their testimony establishes a pattern that predates his relationship with your family. This isn't about you being a difficult stepdaughter. This is about him being a violent man." The preliminary hearing was set for October. Olivia called the night before, her voice small and uncertain. "Can we talk?" she asked. "Just the 2 of us." We met at a coffee shop near the university, neutral territory where neither of us held advantage. My sister looked different, smaller somehow, like someone had deflated the confidence she usually carried. "I've been going to therapy," she said without preamble. "Daniel insisted on it if we're going to try to fix things." My therapist asked me to think about times when I might have seen Robert being cruel to you and chosen not to process it. And? I prompted when she didn't continue. And there were moments, Olivia admitted, tears welling in her eyes. Times when you'd leave family dinners suddenly and Robert would have this satisfied look. Times when you'd have bruises you explained away and Mom would change the subject really quickly. I told myself it was normal sibling stuff, that you were just clumsy or dramatic or trying to get attention. But I think I knew. Somewhere inside, I knew, and I didn't want to deal with it because dealing with it would have complicated my perfect life. It would have, I agreed quietly. There was no point in softening the truth. Acknowledging what was happening to me would have meant acknowledging that the man paying for your education and your condo was a monster. That's a hard thing to accept. I'm so sorry, Olivia whispered. I should have been a better sister. I should have protected you instead of competing with you for scraps of approval from someone who wasn't worth it. We sat together in that coffee shop for 3 hours, talking through memories with new context. Olivia shared things she'd observed and dismissed. I shared the reality of what those moments had actually been like for me. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. A recognition that we'd both been children caught in an abusive system, just playing different roles within it. The trial happened in November. Robert's defense team tried every tactic they could think of. They painted me as mentally unstable, resentful, financially motivated. They tried to exclude my father's documentation as hearsay. They attacked the credibility of the other women who'd come forward. But the prosecution had too much evidence, too many witnesses, too clear a pattern. The jury deliberated for 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on multiple counts of assault and battery, plus charges related to the historical abuse. Robert was sentenced to 3 years in prison, followed by 5 years of probation. It wasn't enough, would never be enough to balance 15 years of terror and pain. But it was something. It was validation. It was proof that I hadn't imagined or exaggerated or deserved what had happened. The courtroom was half empty when the verdict was read. My mother wasn't there, had chosen not to attend any day of the trial. But Olivia was, sitting on my side of the room for the first time. Claire held my hand as the judge delivered the sentence, and Daniel sat behind Olivia, supporting her through the collapse of the family mythology she'd believed her entire life. 6 months later, I stood in the community center where I taught art classes, hanging my first solo exhibition. The paintings were raw and honest, visual representations of trauma and survival and the slow work of healing. Claire had helped me rent the space. Olivia had helped hang the pieces. Daniel, who'd quietly resumed his relationship with my sister once she'd done the hard work of therapy and accountability, had designed the gallery program. My mother appeared at the opening reception, looking older and uncertain. We'd spoken only a handful of times since the trial, awkward conversations where she struggled to apologize for things she still didn't fully understand. I don't know what to say, she admitted, standing in front of a painting I'd titled The House That Broke Me. These are beautiful and terrible, and I see now what you were trying to tell me all those years. I'm glad you came, I said, and meant it. Forgiveness was still distant, possibly unattainable. But acknowledgement was a start. That night, after everyone had left and I was alone in the gallery space, I sat on the floor surrounded by my work and felt something unfamiliar settling in my chest. Peace maybe, or just the absence of fear. For the first time since I was 12 years old, I didn't have to calculate the cost of being myself. I didn't have to monitor my expressions or measure my words or prepare for punishment. I was simply Maya, an artist and a survivor, a woman who'd fought her way free from a man who'd tried to break her and failed. My phone buzzed with a message from Olivia. Proud of you, big sis. The exhibition is incredible. Lunch next week? I smiled and typed back a response. The relationship we were building now was different from the one we'd lost, more honest and harder one. But it was real in a way the old version never had been. Outside, Austin's lights glittered against the November darkness. Somewhere across the city, Robert Mitchell sat in a cell, facing consequences for the first time in his life. And here I was, free and whole and finally beginning to understand what my father had meant when he said I was remarkable. Not despite what I'd survived, but because I'd survived it and then had the courage to speak truth into silence. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.